Hey, Mike.
Hi, Caleb. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing quite well. We've got some nice evening sunlight streaming in here in California, and it's a little bit warm, but it's hard to complain about that.
Nice. What are you drinking tonight?
Tonight, I am drinking a sidecar. It has the word car in it. That was the best I could do. Although I fear that the lemon that I used is a little overly tart. I procured said lemon at Safeway, and Safeway is a miraculous company in that they manage to exist in California yet have terrible produce, and I don't understand how they do it.
Well, I have an old pal today.
Nice.
And it's good. I had to get some more rye over the weekend, and so I'm ready to go.
One can never have too much rye.
Yeah, apparently the dry vermouth, you're only supposed to keep for a month or two, so I should be getting some fresh vermouth. This might be a little bit old, so...
It is going to age. A pro tip for you and everyone else out there, if you get the splits, like the 375 milliliter vermouth bottles, once you then move to the full-size 750 milliliter bottles, when you get to halfway, you can pour it into the 375 bottle and prolong its life because it's actually the amount of oxygen sitting in the bottle that causes it to age. So if you immediately take some and dump it into a smaller bottle, it'll live longer.
All right. Pro tip. I like it.
There you go.
So tonight, I thought we could talk about safety and safety as it pertains to Tesla, their current vehicles, how safety is measured by outside agencies, as well as sort of the features that go into safety, what, if anything, is inherently better about Teslas or electric cars in general. And this really sparked my attention because this, as we record, a news story came out about a surgeon who owns a Model X, Mr. Brahman from Edina, Minnesota, got into a car accident in his Model X. A GMC truck struck him by going through a red light illegally at about 45 miles per hour. And there were 6 passengers in the Model X and his dog, apparently. And they all walked away without any major injuries from this really big accident. And I sent you the photos of it in the story, and the entire front of the Model X was totally sheared off and destroyed.
Yeah, the front was obliterated.
Yeah, and also just like the guy said that he was really impressed that the airbags covered the entire panoramic windshield, and really everyone was just sort of more shooken up than anything.
Even in the Falcon Wing doors too had some airbags popping up on top of them. Yeah,
and so I just thought it was another example of there's going to be accidents with Teslas, and especially another car driving through a red light. It's going to be tough to avoid that. And so, how safe are Teslas? How much does Tesla take safety as a design goal? And just sort of talk through that a bit, since the Model X has not yet been reviewed by any of the safety boards that do crash testing yet, but the Model S has. So I wanted to sort of talk through what they've done so far there, and then maybe hit on what it means for Model 3 towards the end of the episode. So that was sort of the main topic for tonight.
Cool. And there was a little bit of miscommunication, and I ended up Googling the safety dance video and got that song stuck in my head. So if at any moment tonight I start lapsing into the lyrics of that great 1980s Montreal new wave song, I apologize.
And I didn't even know what that was, and you reminded me. I knew the song.
I knew
apparently.
that you knew what it was. I mean, everyone knows what it is.
Yeah, if you don't know what we're talking about, I would recommend putting that into Google or Spotify or Apple Music, and you'll...
Put it into YouTube, because then you can watch the video, which has the full effect of the... essentially, it's takes place at a Ren fair, and there's a maypole, and there is a dwarf playing a ukulele or a lyre or whatever it is. It is a quintessential piece of 1980s MTV history.
All right, so back to Tesla safety instead of the safety dance.
So safely, how does Tesla rate with crash testing, and how do, maybe you can walk us through what crash testing is, what are the official channels for it, and how Tesla performs?
Yeah, so Tesla has performed quite well in all the tests they've gone up against. And so separate from like car reviews, which are purely subjective from Car and Driver or Top Gear or other automotive magazines or sites, crash testing is done by sometimes government agencies and sometimes independent third parties. And they run vehicles through the same tests, and so they can have a comparable set of scores to allow consumers to understand how to make more informed buying decisions, as well as other interested parties, in this case, insurance companies, in understanding how to insure different vehicles and the occupants who are holding the policies. So I think the first sort of thing to go over is who some of the major players are in the testing world. And so
when you say government, are you referring to the U.S. government, or is it each individual like areas around the world have their own government testing?
Yeah, so the U.S. government has one. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, is tasked with testing high-volume vehicles. And then many of the European Union countries will follow the European New Car Assessment Program, which is shortened to the Euro NCAP program. I couldn't find too much information for many other countries who do major testing. So if listeners know of other major crash testing standards, love to know. But the three that really stood out were the NHTSA one, the NCAP, the Euro NCAP, and then also an independent one in the US, the IIHS, which is for the Institute of the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety, which is actually a nonprofit funded by insurance companies. So one is a federal agency, NHTSA, the other is a nonprofit, and then the NCAP is also a government agency for the European countries. And so these folks basically will buy vehicles that they believe will be high sellers, so that there's more likelihood that people will care what those reviews are. So they're not necessarily testing super niche cars, they're testing high volume cars. And they will run them through a battery of crash tests, which are executed by, in some cases, third-party companies who have to adhere to certain standards to execute the tests. And then those results are made public and are usually summed up in some sort of rating system. So,
and these are the videos that we see with like the crash test dummies, or the big like sled with like a weight on it, like smashing into the side of a car.
Yeah, exactly. And so different agencies will release those videos. In doing research, like the NHTSA ones are officially released in a WMV format, which was very difficult to play, but YouTube had a lot of transcoded ones. So the NHTSA testing in the US was introduced in 1979. So not that old, but sort of really came around to start understanding how safe vehicles really were in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and early 70s. Cars were extremely dangerous. There's some really interesting videos of watching 50s vehicles go through crash testing, and they are completely obliterated.
Oh yeah, like the steering column would come and impale the driver. And the actually in the 70s, the Ford Pinto was a famous one. My dad actually had one of those, and it was famous for combusting and exploding in bumper to bumper collisions, like low speed bumper to bumper collisions, because the gas tank was located like right behind the rear bumper, such that it actually would get impaled and explode during a low speed crash.
Yeah, so car safety was not the largest concern of car manufacturers in that era. Seatbelts were not required. And so the government, at least in the US, wanted to start putting some standards in place and starting to create an environment where manufacturers would be held to account for the safety of their vehicles. And so the NHTSA Testing Institute was created. It's called the New Car Assessment Program, NCAP. And it's generally what you would think of as when car advertisements talk about 5-star safety rating. That's what the 5-star system is. That's from the federal funded program. And interestingly, They buy the cars with taxpayer dollars, so they're not provided by the companies. And they choose which cars they want to test. It isn't that every single car is going to get a 5-star crash testing assessment. Many cars don't even get tested because they don't sell in enough volume to warrant the agency testing them. So,
when you say volume, do you mean like the Bugattis aren't getting tested?
Yeah, no, many of those cars are not tested. Also, many convertibles and cabriolets are not tested that sell in low volume. So yeah, many cars are not tested. Only
weird. You'd think you'd want the convertibles to be tested with, especially with like crashing or flipping and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's funny. Actually, only $12 million is spent on the program each year. So really low cost service.
So you can't really test many McLarens with that budget.
No, certainly not. That would give you maybe 10. And you might need more than one to crash test. So it's interesting. So like they go to pretty extreme lengths in their standards to even make sure cars are tested at the same temperature. So they'll temperature control the testing environment to 70 degrees to make sure they behave the same way. So it's very rigorous. And what's interesting also is that new standards have been put in place since 2010 for the NCAP, so the NHTSA testing, because what was happening was many of the manufacturers were starting to realize, similar to high school students taking standardized tests, that it wasn't about how smart you were, and in the analog here, how good of a safety vehicle you were, but actually how well you did on the test. And so car companies were getting very good at engineering their cars to perform well in the safety tests, such that many cars would get 4 stars, even very unsafe in real-world performance vehicles. And so in 2010, they raised the standard, so before any Model S's were tested, such that 5-star ratings would be much more difficult to attain. And so older cars, anything before the 2010 vintage, those star ratings are actually not comparable and are sort of a more inflated scale. They added more tests. They added more data from the crash test dummies, including things like the whiplash types effects that would happen to people's heads. And they also added a small adult female dummy into the testing sort of barrage, where previously they had been using a 50th percentile adult male as the dummy. And so for smaller men, smaller women, or average size women, and also teens, many of the tests, when you would run them on those sorts of people, would actually perform very poorly because they couldn't withstand the forces of these cars coming into them.
Oh yeah, you'll see like shorter people and they're almost like hugging the steering wheel because they're so close to the steering wheel because to reach the pedals, I guess. That, if all of a sudden an airbag shoots off, that's going to be a very different sort of response than a taller person.
Yeah, exactly. And also sort of where your head is in relation to the windshield, and how much mass you have as a body, how you move through the vehicle. So
that's interesting. So that means like when they're crash testing, that means they're doing like a head-on, like a 3/4 kind of thing. And there's I guess an interesting tension there where they want to standardize it across models, but by standardizing it, they create the ability for people to cheat it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and also so the NHTSA one has 3 tests. There's the first is a full frontal test, which is sort of the likelihood of a vehicle, driver or passenger injury, and when a vehicle crashes into a barrier at 35 miles an hour, which apparently is a very unlikely scenario in most crashes. So that one's sort of that's the classic one you see of just the car running into a cement barrier.
Yeah.
So that's number 1. That's at 35 miles an hour. The next one is a side impact. And there's one where it's like being hit with a 3,000-pound vehicle at 38.5 miles per hour.
That's the one that I have some experience with. My wife was driving our 2000 Volkswagen Jetta and got T-boned by a Honda Civic when we lived in Seattle, and totaled the vehicle. But the Volkswagen, for all of its faults with the diesel problems lately, has generally a pretty good track record in safety, and that's where we That's where we ended up. She walked away okay, so that was
that's good.
Yeah.
And so that one had been there, but they recently added a new one of a side impact with a pole at 20 miles per hour, which more approximates if someone were to slide off the road into a telephone pole.
That's strangely specific.
Yeah, apparently what's interesting about the pole test is that it focuses the energy on a much smaller area. And so that creates more acute challenges for impeding on the driver's footwell.
And is that area like always the same, or do they randomize that area when they do the crash test?
It's always the exact same. So this is one of the challenges, is that they want to test them all exactly the same because different vehicles will have, different sizes and things. And so they always sort of hit it in the exact same spot. And so this is the same challenge where they, once the test is known, car manufacturers will sometimes reinforce their vehicles for those specific parts of the of the car. And
you can't really test again. Like once you crash test it once, you need a completely new vehicle to do it in a different location if you were going to do that.
Yeah, and also that, there's just sort of a limit to how much you can crash a car and not, you can just sort of crash it once. So they need to buy a couple of the vehicles for each test. The saving grace is that the other, the IIHS and also the NCAP one, have different tests. So we'll get to those in a second. But the final one for the NHTSA, which is a new one also, is a rollover rating. And what's funny is it's gotten to the point where they don't even actually test it. They just use a formula to calculate what the likelihood of rolling over would be and how...
Seriously?
Yeah.
We're not that far removed from the Suzuki Samurais and the Ford Explorer debacles of the 90s and early aughts.
So apparently they just take the car's width and center of gravity into account, plug it into the formula, and the agency says that the test is valid after comparisons with actual statistics from car crashes. So
fascinating.
Tesla seems to have mentioned at one point that they broke the testing machine. So that may be, I'm not sure. I saw some conflicting, there's conflicting information about the rollover test. So we'll get to the Tesla results for these tests, but just sort of to outline it. And the IIHS one is apparently a lot more rigorous, and Tesla has not yet gone through that one. So there's 5 different crash tests in that one. And they do a lot more realistic testing. So a small overlap where 25% of the car is hit a barrier at a higher speed of 40 miles per hour. There's a moderate one where a larger portion of the car strikes a barrier. There's no single straight on test. There's a side test where an SUV hits the car at 31 miles per hour. They have a roof strength test where a metal plate is pushed against the car's roof and figures out how much force is required to push the roof in. And then there's now a new head restraint one and seat test to test whiplash and forces on the head and neck of the driver and passengers to make sure the safety restraints are working well. And then the IHS also started putting in a new one for active safety, which is front crash prevention. So you might have seen some new Volkswagen commercials or Volvo commercials talking about emergency braking systems. And this is that test. They're starting to test for it, and to get the highest rating, which is apparently good, top safety pick, which is good, you have to actually have front braking assist. So
is that just braking, or does that some I don't remember what it is, but during the Olympics there's been a commercial airing, it might have been Mercedes, about obstacle avoidance too, where they apparently the car will brake and cut the wheels to get to prevent you from hitting something. Apparently,
so far the testing is just the emergency braking system, the automated emergency braking, and on a straight line path. But the IIHS, because it is funded by insurance companies, has, if you think about the motivations of an insurance company in doing tests, why would they do it? They do it because they want to better understand when you apply for insurance and you have to list what car and what make and what year. for them to be able to assess the likelihood of you being in a major accident, and if you are in a major accident, the likelihood of you in having a major injury.
And now we're back to the morbid actuarial tables.
Yeah, very, very real. They want to understand how much it's going to cost them if you're in an accident, and if you're in a 1970 Pinto, you're going to cost them a lot more than if you're in a Volvo S60 or a Tesla Model S. And so they want to understand that, and better just have better tables and better data. And so it's a second score. And it's generally regarded as more stringent and more accurate for real world accidents. And one of the sort of general complaints about the NHTSA testing is that because it is a federal agency, it's more likely to be lobbied and sort of inflated by car companies wanting higher scores, because one of the things you see in car marketing all the time is people saying 5-star crash testing rating, and that's from those federal tests. And many times they'll give a 5-star rating to a certain aspect. So you might get 5-star in the front collision, but not 5-star on the rollover or the side. But when they use it in advertising, they may not say 5-star overall. They might just say a 5-star rating, which might just be the front crash. And many cars can get 5-star front crash, but not side or rollover or other sites. So it's definitely important to really dig in and find out the actual set of results, and not just the marketing, someone saying we got a 5-star rating, since a very small percentage of cars actually get 5-star in every category.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. We were talking about it earlier, and you were pointing out that, the IIHS is really more of the free market approach, where, regardless of government lobbying, or especially in the case of the U.S., where briefly the U.S. government, I guess, was a owner or majority investor in General Motors. There creates some conflicts, whereas the IIHS is a little more theoretically independent, although I guess the U.S. government in the past 10 years has also been a owner or majority investor in insurance companies too, so who knows. So how has the Model S performed in these tests, and has it varied based on whether it's government or insurance industry?
Yeah, so the Model S has gone through the IIHS. Has not gone through the IIHS. They have not gone through the...
That's the insurance company.
Insurance folks.
Okay.
They have asked to be tested by them, but they have not yet been tested. So there's lots of conspiracy theories about why that's happened.
Is it a volume issue, or...
That's what the general belief is, but they've tested Audis that are in the same class that sell less than the Model S. So it's not quite clear why it hasn't happened yet, and it's been over 3 years since they could have tested it. So that's a little bit peculiar, and so we don't have that.
Do you know if that affects what the insurance rates are for Model S owners?
That is actually a good point. Model S is a very expensive car to insure. The confounding factor there is, though, that because it's an aluminum car and has a lot more aluminum body panels than most cars, the bodywork fixing tends to be very expensive. And so it's hard to untangle the safety rating potential and the actual repairability cost for the Model S. And also the Model S can't usually go to independent dealers or independent repair shops. So it kind of has to go back to Tesla. And so the auto insurers can't work out special deals with different firms to repair cars at better rates. So it's hard to know for sure if it's because of the crash test rating or it's more expensive car to repair, and it's also a luxury car. Mm-hmm. But generally, it is a little bit higher than other cars of its class. So yeah, I think it might just be more of an unknown for them than it not being safe, because it's a NHTSA rating. Tesla has been reviewed by the federal U.S. one and also the Euro NCAP test, and it actually performed incredibly well. And so I think that one of the important pieces here is that it it performed so well that they actually Tesla touted that it was the best car ever reviewed safety-wise, and that it got 5.4 stars. And then...
Yeah, can we talk about that whole my amplifier goes to 11 sort of situation there with the Model S?
Yeah, so they came out and Tesla said that it translated to a 5.4 star rating. And then the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, NHTSA, came out and said, we do not rate vehicles beyond 5 stars and does not rank or order vehicles within the starred categories.
So how did they get to 5.4?
So Tesla later then rebutted and said, we stand by what we wrote in the press release. We believe it to be true based on NHTSA's numeric relative risk score and overall vehicle safety score that ranks cars across its crash test categories. The VSS scores correlates to the overall probability of an occupant being injured in an accident. This data can be found publicly, and Tesla's vehicle scores were 0.42, which was lower than any car listed in public documents. So essentially they're saying, when you translate the raw data that is provided to manufacturers and is made public, no car scored better than a Tesla, and sort of its probability of injury was 7%, and you only need to be 10% to be 5-star. So I think they sort of interpreted the difference as 0.3
so
more.
The data from the crash test is made public, the actual raw data, in addition to the final score.
Right. And the NHTSA point is like a 5-star car is a 5-star car. And Tesla's point is, no, we are actually much better than any other car that's been tested. And we're going to talk about that. And so it hadn't really happened before. No one had really wanted to say more than 5-star. And Tesla was one of the first people that I could find that actually tried to claim they were better than 5-star. And so it caused a little bit of a kerfuffle.
Do you think that they're actually going to try and get it moved to a 6-star system, or are they going to try and push everyone else down, like and reset the curve?
Yeah, I think that the standard will continue to increase because it was readjusted in 2011 after 30 plus years of being in place. And now that the insurance folks are doing active safety, I think that the federal mandates will also start taking active safety into account. And many companies have already pledged to put automatic emergency braking into effect in their cars. So I think that will continue to be a rising standard. But what's interesting, so for the Tesla, the overall combined test showed a 7% likelihood of injury, and a 5-star rating is 10%. A 4-star rating is like 20%. So the lowest likelihood of serious injury, if you want to buy a car, the Tesla is the lowest. And also in every single subcategory of those tests, they also got a 5-star rating. So the Tesla is extremely safe. And also in the Euro NCAP test, which was the European one, which has a very different set of tests, it also got the highest rating. And so Tesla had a press release about it and information. And they said it's just like one of few cars to ever achieve a 5-star safety rating from both the Euro NCAP and the NHTSA. And it's the only car to achieve the 5-star and the 5-star in every category, including front impact, side impact, and rollover. And then only 2 other cars have earned the same recognition since 2011.
So you think like heads were rolling at Volvo headquarters in Sweden?
Yeah, I mean, because
let's get on this.
Exactly. I mean, the Volvo S60, which is a sedan, which is priced at around $34,000 US, was the previous the most safe car previously, and so Volvo, which is built their brand on safety, has sort of been knocked off their perch, as it were. And what's interesting is that the actual safety features, like the Volvos don't have the most airbags, they don't necessarily have the most sort of feature-laden safety components that other cars might have. And so actual safety of cars goes much deeper than just how many airbags you have. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the actual components that make a Tesla safe. Like why is it the safest car, and how does Tesla walk in as a new car entrant and become the safest car when there's hundreds of other models released that it beat? How is that possible?
Is that related to it being a simpler electric vehicle, or is it something more than that?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple key things. So the first is that without an engine up front, there is more distance for a frontal crash to absorb the force of an oncoming car.
But there's also less like inertial mass too to absorb the impact. So that's an interesting sort of tension there.
So the example that Elon Musk likes to give is that jumping into a shallow pool with rocks, a big boulder in it, is not as good as jumping into a deep pool with no rocks. So his point is that the
Are those my only two choices?
Right. Yes. So, and yeah, he's very good at setting up dichotomies you would not want to actually pursue one option of. And so his point is that an engine is the boulder. So yes, an engine may have more mass and could absorb it, but actually that engine will just continue moving into the passenger compartment. It actually doesn't absorb the force because it doesn't break. It's too strong.
But it is a large amount of mass that's moving in the same direction and same velocity and direction that you're moving.
Yes, so that's a second. So that's actually the second component. So having a large crumple zone of the frunk is very valuable because the general physics of it is just like the force over distance.
I feel like we need a little sad trombone song that plays every time you have to say frunk.
I know it. I think Tesla's actually stopped calling it a frunk. They just call it a front trunk now. But that absorbs a lot of energy. And in all of the crashes that I've seen of the Teslas that are somewhat front or somewhat side swiped, that's a really important part because that entire front can be sheared off or collapsed and absorb a ton of energy before it gets to the passenger compartment. So that's sort of one.
Yeah, and it certainly was with the Model X crash that we were talking about at the beginning.
Exactly. And so number two is overall mass. So a large object and mass-filled object hitting a smaller mass object, the heavy mass object will win. It will push it out of the way. It will transfer more of its energy to the smaller car.
It will exert its will.
Exactly. And so a Tesla is over 5,000 pounds. So it is a very heavy vehicle relative to its class because of the batteries. And so going up against an SUV, it's pretty equally matched and certainly is heavier than almost every other sedan.
And its mass is going to be a lot lower than the SUVs as well.
Right. So that's point number three.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. We don't have this written down. We're just freestyling. So point number three is that the mass is very low, which helps with rollover. So Tesla claimed that they couldn't even get the car to roll over in testing. They had to bring in a special testing machine to roll it over because it wouldn't roll over in its normal testing because the batteries are very heavy. They're below the floor pan. And so this helps both in performance, handling, but also in safety because rollovers, many SUVs have rollover problems because the center of gravity is quite high. The Tesla is very low, and so the mass is hitting at a low angle of inflection, and so it's unlikely to flip. Yeah,
we definitely noticed that when we were test driving the Model X too. Like even though it's technically like a higher crossover type vehicle, probably not an SUV, but at least a crossover, its handling is incredible. It was like driving a go-kart.
Yep. And one of the other interesting things is that the Model S also beats the safety score of other SUVs and minivans. So even when you compare it to other sedans, it wins. But even if you compare it to minivans and SUVs, which typically are better safety-wise than sedans, it also wins. And some of the other benefits are Tesla has worked hard to sort of the fourth thing, I guess, would be that they've worked hard to engineer it to be 5-star, even in parts of the car where the testing doesn't occur. So they made sure it was 5-star for the tests, but then they also looked at where the weakest parts of the car were and made sure that if they were tested in those spots, they would also achieve a 5-star rating. And so they did this through lots of aluminum reinforcing in certain parts. sort of thinking about crumple zones, and like the roof is so strong you could stack 4 Teslas on top of your Tesla and it still wouldn't collapse. So in a rollover situation, if it were to roll over, which is extremely rare, unlikely, it would actually be fine. So Tesla just also went above and beyond to actively engineer the vehicle to be safe, and sort of win even when it wasn't being tested in those particular areas. So that's all the passive safety. And I think it's important to just sort of mention, like, there's both active safety features, so things that help you not get into an accident or a car crash in some form. And then passive safety relates to features that protect you after a crash or safety incident has occurred. So seat belts, the actual sort of structural integrity of the vehicle, airbags are all part of passive safety. And then active safety would be things like emergency braking, ABS, and then sort of blind spot detection, all these other features. So passively, the Tesla is extremely safe. If you are to be hit by another vehicle or some other object, you are quite safe in the cocoon of a Tesla Model S and also the Model X, but the X hasn't fully been tested yet. And then on the active side, Tesla has a lot of features because they have the radar front, they have the ultrasonics all around the vehicle, and they have the forward camera. So they can help do the automatic braking, collision avoidance. So if someone's veering into your lane, the Tesla will swerve, and also help you try not to hit another car. If you're moving into their lane and drifting, it will push you back. And what's nice is all those features are included standard for free in your Tesla, separate from the autopilot sort of active features. So even though Tesla charges for autopilot, they don't charge for these safety features. And I think that's a really important thing to note, because many car brands are charging extra for their safety, forward collision, and it's sort of on higher end packages. But to date, every Tesla that's sold has included those features for free. You don't have to pay an upgrade. And the Model 3 also is been described to not Tesla has said that they won't charge for those safety features that are these really technology-enabled features.
Cool. Well, you just mentioned autopilot, so I immediately started paying attention to what you were talking about.
Sure.
So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about how much do you think this focus on safety and the sort of safety of the passenger cabin has to do with creating an environment where people will be confident in letting the car take over more of the driving features. We've noticed this with Tesla and their focus on safety. And recently there's been the announcement that Uber is going to be starting to do some self-driving rides in Pittsburgh or the Pittsburgh area. And they're using some of the Volvo XC90s, which is like the biggest, safest possible Volvo. And there seems to be this sort of undercurrent of, hey, it's okay to get in this vehicle and let the robot drive you, because even if the robot screws up, you're going to be okay.
Yeah, I think that it certainly doesn't hurt to make sure that the car is safe, first and foremost, passively. And then secondarily saying we have active features, which now autopilot will be a part of those, to say we are better at driving than a human and will cause less accidents in the first place. I think that it will be true, and I think Volvo being involved with so much of the self-driving is that, as we've talked about in the past, self-driving will really gain adoption from regulation as a safety feature, and that automakers will try and push automation as safety first and convenience second, because I think that for many people, the idea of being in a safer car is quite important. A lot of money and a lot of marketing dollars are spent in touting the safety of different vehicles. Even vehicles that aren't inherently that safe relative to their peers still look for glimmers of hope in their safety ratings to include in their marketing.
Right. Well, and the trend over time, especially over the past few decades, has been that there are fewer and fewer deaths because more and more people are surviving what accidents they do have. So there has been a clear, marketing aside, there has been a very clear trend of like this focus on safety having like tangible results.
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly the trend for safety has been very clearly a forward and improving thing, that cars have become safer, and as a result, fewer people have died and been injured in vehicles than they were 30, 40 years ago. So I think that the way to continue to improve it, because so many people have been working on the passive safety, there's diminishing returns occurring there. I mean, there's only so much you can reinforce a vehicle and still make it a movable vehicle.
I don't know. There was, if you remember the movie Demolition Man, that when they had an accident, the whole car filled up with foam. So there is that possibility. Hollywood has shown us the way.
Yeah, I think that there are certainly something. I mean, like airplanes that throw down foam to land, and all these things are technically possible. We haven't seen any commercialization of many of those.
Thank you for humoring me on that one.
More extreme measures. And I definitely believe, and Tesla certainly believes, that the active safety through autopilot type features and the car getting involved will lead to the next sort of opportunity in safety improvements, more so than stronger sidewalls and better crash resistance. Because I think the most fundamental thing is, it would be better not to get into an accident at all than to have to cope with the physics of two very heavy objects colliding. And so anything you can do to prevent that is certainly a much bigger win than dealing with the inevitable physics of two heavy objects. So I think that what's interesting is that Tesla has already shown a very capable ability to make safe cars because of the intrinsic benefits of an electric vehicle with the battery in the bottom, not having a large engine in the front, so allowing the crumple zone, and also just engineering the car generally to be safer from the start. Plus, their focus on autopilot type features and the benefits that come from the car sensing where it is more accurately and quickly than a human can. So in the context of a Model 3, Tesla saying we want to get 5-star in every category, I think they'll be able to do it. And I think it bodes well for sales of Model 3, because I don't know about you, and I'm curious, but I think as I'm getting more and more old, the safety of my vehicle becomes a higher percentage of the decision-making process, because I know more and more that driving a car is extremely dangerous, and I'm more concerned with preservation of life and of my friends and eventual family than of the style of the car or its speed, or other characteristics are taking a back seat, as it were. So I'm curious, how do you rank safety, and do you think about safety? Do you look at 5-star ratings? How does it affect your buying decision for cars you've made in the past?
Well, we actually had a pretty severe car accident when we were living in Seattle back in, this would have been 2007. We had a 2000 Jetta, which was it was a nice little car. My wife got T-boned when she was coming through an intersection, and we actually didn't think of the safety ratings of the vehicle when we bought it, but it did have pretty high safety ratings, and she was able to completely walk away from this pretty terrible accident where she was T-boned right into the driver's side door of the vehicle.
Wow.
It was, she walked away from it, and we then all of a sudden became acutely aware of safety ratings, and we ended up getting the Volkswagen Rabbit that we have now, which is also a pretty high, it's not the most attractive vehicle in the world, but it has a pretty high safety ratings. It definitely elevated it in our consciousness, and we feel better about it. It is something where maybe you have to be burned to really feel that.
Yeah, and I think, I was in a pretty bad car accident as a kid in a bus that rolled over multiple times, and luckily everyone was relatively unharmed, but it was definitely reminded me that you can be in a car accident, even if you're not driving, and all sorts of scenarios can lead to bad things. And so I am, very conscious of the cars I'm driving in, and I think that Tesla, as they ramp up their marketing and go more mass market, what is going to be the deciding factor between buying an A4 and a BMW 3 Series and an entry-level C-Class or a very high-spec Hyundai or Honda, for many people, is going to be the safety. And especially if it's an entry family car, I think safety is incredibly important. And so I think that Tesla will continue to tout the safety, especially as if it is the safest sedan in its class, that will be a really important part of the marketing of the Model 3, even more than the Model S, because I think that luxury buyers expect a higher level of safety anyways, because they're paying for so much of the safety features, airbags, seat belts, airbags, automatic brake, or even just anti-lock braking. Many of these safety features started on luxury cars first. And so I think luxury buyers generally expect that their cars are safer than less expensive cars. But when you're in the $25,000 or $30,000 range, it's not always expected that the car is super safe. And so unless you're buying a Volvo, I think it's not guaranteed that your car is that great unless you really check into it. And especially with so many people buying SUVs, which are inherently heavier and generally safer, except for rollover, if you're buying a sedan, you really do want to make sure that you're going to be okay if you end up getting T-boned by a big GMC truck, like what happened in this accident a few days ago. So
yeah, I think that's a really weird dynamic on the roads here in at least in the US, where there can be a pretty big discrepancy between the size of the vehicle and the amount of sort of inertial mass that you're throwing in one direction versus the skill of the person who's operating it. There's no sort of test that says, like, if you have twice the inertial mass of another vehicle, that you have to be twice as good of a driver. It's not that at all. And it's almost some sort of like arms race of, I want to be safe, so I'm going to be in this vehicle that's high and it's heavy, and if I do get in an accident, I'll be safer. And if I happen to not be paying attention and run through a red light like this in this particular accident, then, well, screw the other person, I'm still going to be safer.
Yeah, I think I was recently rented a Toyota Yaris, which is a very small subcompact car, for a trip, and I actively felt unsafe on the highway in that car for multiple reasons. It was loud. You could hear a lot of road noise, and it was moved around by the wind, which is clearly not a good thing. And it's very small. And when you're passing very large SUVs, you do not want to go up against an SUV in a very small car. And so it is this strange phenomenon where you can buy a heavy car and be safer yourself, but you're actively impeding on the safety of other people in some way, because if you do get in an accident, you are going to cause them more harm than if you're in an equally matched mass-sized car. So I think that certainly as more and more cars become electric, the mass will be more equal between smaller cars and larger cars. But it is sort of this strange thing where, as a society, at least in the U.S., we don't have any way to deal with that besides the wealth of the person, because smaller cars generally are less expensive than larger cars, and there's just been a general push towards SUVs and a belief that SUVs are safer, even though they tend to have bigger rollover problems, which can be a pretty bad issue. So, yeah, I think overall, like, Tesla is actively working to make safety a priority. I think that digging into the safety of Tesla relative to other cars made me even more confident that they are very safe, both from a tested point of view as well as from doing more research into third parties who have assessed their cars. And I think bodes well for the company overall that there's really only one major manufacturer in Volvo that is known for safety. And Tesla, I think, has the ability to be a second manufacturer that can say safety is a very high priority. And part of that is due to it being electric. And so because they do have this lead on being an electric car, they get to draft off of that inherent benefit. And I think longer term, as more and more cars do become electric, it's a great thing for everyone because there'll be more safe cars inherently than there are today. So I think that's those are the main things I thought would be interesting in talking about safety. Is there anything else, Mike, that was on your mind?
So did the safety of the Tesla factor in at all when you were reserving your Model 3?
I can't say that it was a motivating factor for making the reservation. I think it is a reassuring point to the decision as more and more cars. So in thinking about like the Volt, after we did the episode, I was reconsidering maybe getting a Volt for a period, or even the Bolt, which I think we'll talk about at some point. And I definitely am excited to see that the Tesla is attempting to be 5-star safe.
The Model 3?
Yeah, the Model 3. But I think that for me, the choice of the next car, safety is definitely a baseline criteria, but it isn't the motivating reason to like want the Model 3. I think for me, it still is the autonomy components and the general sort of performance characteristics of it. But I'm certainly very happy that it will be a safe car as described, and I have pretty high confidence that their modeling will let them actually have that be true. So
that's a nice bonus.
I think figuring out what 3 tests are going to, what the outcome of those will be in a simulation. I think we have the technology to do that. So they've been pretty good at predicting that.
Do you think they have to try harder because they're a new company and a new car company and they're trying to establish their brand?
Certainly. I think that I think safety is a very easy way to try and throw someone under the bus, as it were, as a corporate citizen. So if their cars were unsafe and a lot of people who got into accidents had issues or deaths, I think you would see a lot more major car manufacturers saying Tesla is an irresponsible manufacturer and they make fast cars, but they also make very dangerous cars. And so I think they realized it was very important. And I think also just very real that Elon Musk has 5 kids. And he said on numerous public occasions that he wants his kids to be safe in the cars that he's driving around and that he's driving in himself. And I can't see how any CEO of a car company would want anything less for their own family and friends. I think it's just unfortunate that not all of them are as stellar. I think it definitely makes an impact.
Cool. So basically, to sum up this episode, we can dance if we want to. We can leave your friends behind.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Sorry. All right. So I think we've gone long enough here. Let's wrap this up. If people have any comments on their safety experiences with a Model S or a Model X, where can they reach us?
Yep, you can tweet at us most quickly at The Tesla Show on Twitter. You can leave a comment on our website, theteslashow.com. And also, if you are into Reddit, we have a subreddit r/The Tesla Show, and we post a new episode each week after we go live. So there's a comment thread if you want to converse with other listeners there as well.
Yeah, we get some great comments. There's some really great stuff that comes in, and we do read it all. And it's great to hear from the people who listen.
Yeah, I mean, we've got some really good stuff. I mean, the Volt one, we got a lot of listeners who are Volt owners and who are either trading in to get a Tesla at some point, and they're using it as a stopover, or they just like their Volt. So we got a lot of good feedback on the Volt. Apologize, it is not a rear-wheel drive car. It is front-wheel drive, so I made a mistake there. So thank you for that correction.
We don't do follow-ups like some podcasts do. We kind of just tend to be a little more zen and kind of look forward. But yeah, we do appreciate all that stuff.
Yeah, and as Mike said, we read all of it. So if you post something, we will see it, and it does influence our thinking more broadly. So we love the feedback and hearing from folks.
And it just makes me feel good.
For sure. It makes it nice to know that people are listening. So with that, we'll be back in about a week with a new discussion.
Awesome.
Talk to you later. It's getting really weird.